Dutton Ranch Episode 7 just completely reordered how you're supposed to feel about its most important character. That flashback sequence at the top of Episode 7, the one set in Fort Worth in 1981, is the kind of scene that retroactively rewrites everything you thought you understood about Bula Jackson. Every ruthless decision, every cold calculation, every moment where she seemed like nothing more than a power-hungry villain standing between Beth and Rip and the life they're trying to build. All of it looks different now. So, before we get into the chaos of the 190th celebration, before we talk about Rob Will seizing his moment, before we get to Carter doing the single most catastrophic thing he has done in 7 episodes, and he has done some things, we need to sit with what this episode reveals about who Beulah actually is and how she got there. Because it matters. It matters for everything that comes after. The flashback opens with a younger Beulah being driven to Billy Bob's Texas by Mariano Reyes, her father's top hand. His job that night was simple. Keep an eye on the boss's daughter. Make sure nothing goes wrong. Something goes wrong. A young mechanic named Luke asks Beulah to dance, and it reads as harmless enough right up until Mariano gets pulled away by the bartender, whom Luke had paid specifically to create the distraction. By the time Mariano figures out what's happening, Beulah is gone. He finds her later, standing alone near a payphone, dress torn, face bruised. The show doesn't spell out every detail of what happened between those 2 points, and it doesn't need to. What Luke did to Beulah is clear. What it cost her is the rest of the episode. The detail that lingers, the one that the episode specifically comes back to, is the missing boot. Beulah couldn't find one of her boots when Mariano found her. It seems like a small thing. It isn't. Keep that detail in mind, because the show brings it back in a way that hits considerably harder the second time. And then there's the question of her father. Beulah asks Mariano to tell him she fell off a mechanical bull. She doesn't want the truth getting out. The way she talks about her father, the way the show frames him, even in his absence, tells you that his reaction to the truth would have been directed at Beulah, not at Luke. That is its own kind of tragedy, sitting underneath the one we just watched. A few weeks after that night, Beulah discovers she's pregnant, and the show, to its credit, doesn't state the obvious outright. It lets you put it together yourself. The child she's carrying is almost certainly Rob Will. Robert William Jackson III, the son she has spent 7 episodes struggling to manage, to forgive, to protect from himself. Think about what that means for everything we've seen. Rob Will's volatility, his addiction, his sense of entitlement to something he was never properly given. All of it makes more sense when you understand that Beulah has spent his entire life looking at him and seeing a reminder of the worst night she ever lived through. The show has been dropping hints that Rob Will grew up without Beulah's full emotional presence, that her father largely raised him. Now we understand why. It's not indifference. It's survival. She could not get close to him without getting close to what he represented. And here is the cruel irony the episode is asking you to sit with. Beulah spent her whole life trying to make sure her children didn't become the kind of person her father was. Cold, controlling, impossible to please. And because she couldn't be what Rob Will needed her to be, she pushed him into exactly that shape anyway. That's not a villain's origin story. That's a tragedy. The second flashback is shorter than the first, and it lands harder. Pregnant and carrying knowledge she can't share with her father, Beulah asks Mariano to drive her to Luke's house. She says she wants to deliver the news. She brings a gun. She walks inside. She shoots him dead. She walks back out. And the first thing she says to Mariano, calmly, without a single tremor in her voice, is that she found her missing boot. That line is doing an enormous amount of work. The boot she lost on the night Luke assaulted her is physically still at his place, sure. But what Beulah is really saying is that she got something back. Something he took from her. She wasn't looking for closure or catharsis the way a lesser show would frame it. She was looking for the specific thing that was taken, and she went and retrieved it. The coldness in that moment is not cruelty. It's resolution. Now, and this is where the theory gets interesting, Beulah can't simply walk away from a murder with no consequences. Mariano is the only witness. My read is that Mariano took the fall for what happened, disappeared across the border to become a fugitive, and left his son Joaquin in Beulah's care in exchange for her promise to raise him right. It explains everything. Why Joaquin grew up at 10 Petal, why Beulah treats him as a son, why she has spent decades honoring an obligation to a man she can never publicly acknowledge. And it makes Beulah's announcement at the 190th celebration, choosing Joaquin as her successor, feel less like a business decision and more like a debt being repaid. Which brings us to the party, and to the moment Rob Will has been building toward since he walked back into this story. Irina helped him get into Beulah's office, texted him, let him in, played a role in this that she has not fully accounted for yet, and when Beulah arrives, she finds her biological son seated behind her desk, reading the succession speech she'd written for Joaquin. He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't appeal. He tells Beulah that if she hands the ranch to Joaquin, Joaquin dies. And Beulah, who has survived everything this life has thrown at her by being the most calculating person in any room she enters, cannot calculate her way out of a son threatening to kill another son. She announces Rob Will as her successor. Joaquin, who had bought a new hat for the occasion, a small, heartbreaking detail, hears it, packs his things, and leaves. He doesn't argue. He doesn't confront her. He just goes. And Beulah watches him leave, knowing she had no other choice, and knowing he doesn't know that. What happens to Joaquin from here is one of the more interesting open questions the season has left on the table. If he finds his way to Mariano, his biological father, who has every reason to feel that Beulah has now broken every promise she ever made to him, the consequences for Tin Petal could be severe in ways that have nothing to do with Beth and Rip. And then there is Carter, who spends this episode being publicly humiliated by Irina in front of her wealthy college friends, drinking more than he should, and ultimately carrying Beulah's taxidermied longhorn head out of her office and smashing it on the ground in front of every important person in her life. The setup is comprehensible enough, even if the behavior isn't exactly defensible. Irina introduces Carter as a friend, tells him to go get himself a drink, goes back to talking to a guy named Harrison Williams, who is everything Carter is not. Wealthy, connected, the kind of person Irina's family would approve of. Sheriff Wade, of all people, is the one who explains it to Carter with minimal ceremony. At parties like this one, the rich stay with their own. Carter hears all of this, drinks through it, confronts Irina, gets told she slept with Harrison, and then apparently decides the appropriate response is to go find the most symbolically significant object in Bula Jackson's home and destroy it. What he was thinking is genuinely unclear, and the show doesn't seem particularly interested in clarifying it. He's drunk, he's humiliated, and Irina's parting shot that Harrison was a bull who knew what he wanted, and Carter was just a wounded steer, apparently activated something in him. Beulah sees it happen. The shock of it, on top of everything else she's absorbed in the last 12 hours, sends her to the ground. McKinnon calls an air ambulance. She's alive. The show's trailer confirmed as much, but the image of Bula Jackson collapsing at her own celebration because a teenager smashed a piece of her family history is one of the stranger and more chaotic endings this show has delivered. With Beulah in the hospital, Rob Will is now the announced successor of Tin Petal, and that creates a direct problem for Rip and Beth that the show has been building toward all season. Rip already punched this man in the face. Rob Will has a short temper, a substance problem, and an enormous amount of something to prove. That combination, running a ranch where Rip Wheeler works as foreman, is not a stable arrangement. There's also Austin Lewis, one of Tin Petal's hands, who spent the back half of this episode saying out loud what everyone knows, that the ranch is dirty, that people disappear from the bunkhouse, and that questions get you fired or worse. He said it in a bar where Beulah's people were listening. With Beulah hospitalized and Rob Will in charge, Austin has made himself a target at the worst possible moment. And Carter still hasn't told Beth and Rip about Dwight's death. He is carrying that, plus the humiliation of this evening, plus whatever consequences Beulah's collapse is going to produce for him. At some point, and I think it's soon, all of that has to come out. The question is whether it comes out on Carter's terms or someone else's. Episode 7 is the best our Dutton Ranch has produced. Not because of the chaos of the finale, though that delivers, but because of what it does with Bula Jackson. It takes a character you've been watching as an obstacle and reveals her as the season's most complicated human being. That flashback reframes everything that came before it and changes everything that comes after. 2 episodes remain. Beulah is down. Rob Will is in charge. Joaquin is gone. Carter has broken something that might be irreparable. And Beth and Rip are embedded inside an operation that just changed hands overnight to someone with every reason to make their lives very difficult. The question I'll leave you with, Does Beulah survive long enough to take back what Rob Will just claimed, or does she come out of that hospital and find she's already been replaced in every way that matters? See you for episode 8.